The three most important members of most NFL franchises are the quarterback, the head coach, and the GM. Today we're going to talk about the pressure Zach Wilson, Robert Saleh, and Joe Douglas may face in 2022, ahead on the Locked On Jets podcast.
You are Locked On Jets, your daily New York Jets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome. This is the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It's Friday, May 27th, 2022, and I'm your host, John B. from GangGreenNation.com, thanking you for making this show your first listen or your first watch every day. This show is free and available on all platforms, including YouTube. If you like what you see or hear, hit that subscribe button and you'll never miss an episode. If you're watching on YouTube, please give the episode a big thumbs up. Helps the channel out, and it helps other Jets fans find Locked On Jets. Just a programming note. This is likely the final week where we will be going Monday through Friday until training camp. Once training camp begins, we'll be back on our regular schedule. But we've reached the point in the summer where it's time to scale things back a little bit. We will still be doing shows. There still will be episodes of Locked On Jets. We probably just will cut it back to a couple of episodes per week. So another reason to hit the subscribe button, because then you'll receive automatic notifications as Locked On Jets episodes are posted. And as I said, this is just a temporary thing every summer for a couple of weeks before the start of training camp. We scale things back a little bit, but we will be back 5 days a week once training camp begins. And on today's show, I kind of wanted to take a look at the state of the New York Jets franchise, because this is our final episode where we're going full time. But really, the 2022 season, in many ways, and not entirely, but there are three very important figures, and these are the three most important figures in the Jets franchise if we don't include ownership. And these are pretty much the three most important figures in most franchises: the quarterback, the head coach, and the general manager. And I think all three of these people, Zach Wilson, the quarterback, Robert Saleh, the head coach, and Joe Douglas, the general manager, face some pressure in 2022. Now, I don't think that they face a ton of pressure that any of them is necessarily on the hot seat. I don't think the Jets are likely to replace Zach Wilson after the season. I don't think the Jets are likely to replace Robert Saleh after the season. I don't think the Jets are likely to replace Joe Douglas after this season. I think that all three of these guys, you never know completely, but all three of these guys are likely, even if they disappoint, even if it's a bad year, all three of these guys are likely to be back in the year 2023. You can never rule anything out, but it's an important year from the standpoint that if they don't have good years, then they could enter 2023 on the hot seat. Then a year from now, if Zach Wilson's coming off a disappointing season, and if the Jets haven't won a lot of games, and there's questions about coaching and questions about the front office, then we could be having a different discussion. And on today's show, I wanted to outline expectations for these guys and the pressure facing them. And I'll begin with Zach Wilson, the most important player the franchise has. It's always the quarterback. We've seen this. You can go down the list, all the reasons the Jets have struggled the last 11 years. But near the top, if not at the top, the failure of young quarterbacks to develop is there. You know, we could start with Mark Sanchez, who never really grew after the team had early success, after he, frankly, had some very good moments. You know, Sanchez was never a consistent quarterback for the Jets, but he did have some good moments and, made some clutch plays for the Jets in those early years. But as the team deteriorated around him, he was not able to pick up the slack. And then, of course, back in 2013, the Jets drafted Geno Smith in the second round. And despite an 8-win rookie season where Geno made a few clutch plays, Geno was really not that great that season. And then the next year, things again kind of fell apart for him. And then, unfortunately, in 2015, we had the incident with Ike Anacapali. And Geno, I think, started one more game for the Jets. It was a year later, and he suffered a season-ending injury in 2016. It never really happened for Geno. 2016 was the year the Jets... We shouldn't even talk about Christian Hackenberg. Let's just move on. The less said about that one, the better. All these guys, all these other guys, you can at least see what the Jets were thinking when they drafted them. And I at least could appreciate, okay, this was a guy who had skills, not Hackenberg. Let's move on. Let's move on there. And then, of course, 2018, the Jets draft Sam Darnold, and that did not work out. So now the questions are with Zach Wilson. And Zach Wilson's coming off a rookie season that I think in some ways was a bit disappointing. I mean, look, if we were talking a year ago and you laid out the statistics Zach Wilson had, you laid out the lack of team success the Jets had, you would have been called. If you said that was what was going to happen a year ago, people would have been saying you're too negative. It just wasn't the rookie season any of us were looking for. I think Zach Wilson came into the league. I think the Jets thought he was further along than he really was. Coming out of BYU, a little bit more raw, a little bit less seasoned than I think the Jets were hoping he would be, and it did not work out. Zach did not look comfortable in the pocket for most of the season, and even when he came back from injuries, and there was one clear improvement when he came back from injuries. He stopped throwing interceptions. He was throwing a lot of interceptions before he got hurt, and his season was kind of divided into two halves. There was pre-injury, which he suffered in the bye week against New England, and then there was post-injury, which he came back right after Thanksgiving against Houston, and in the second half of his season, he stopped throwing interceptions, which was good, but that was not accompanied by an increase in productivity. In fact, it was actually accompanied by a decrease in productivity because his completion percentage went down that second half. It was worse in the second half than it was in the first half. So were his yards per attempt. So he was protecting the football better, but it seemed like he was kind of compensating. It seemed like the way he got it done was he was making less plays. He was attempting less plays down the field. Less attempts to try and make something happen. He's now had a full off season to digest things, and I think that can be a big deal. And we're going to hear in training camp one of the ongoing storylines will undoubtedly be everybody will be talking about how much more comfortable Zach Wilson is in the second year of the system, and we've heard this for every young quarterback the Jets have had in recent years. So all of this talk means nothing. The question is whether he really is more comfortable in the system, and that will only be answered in the regular season. But the Jets, I think, have built a solid foundation around him. I mean, this offensive line, which was an absolute disaster when Joe Douglas took it over in 2019, now looks pretty decent. I mean, you have 5 players who, on paper, look solid. Now, you never know. On paper is not on the field. You don't know whether guys are going to regress. You don't know. You really don't know what you're going to get out of Mekhi Becton. But on paper, this looks like a really solid offensive line after the free agent signing of Laken Tomlinson. And this receiver group, it's not a spectacular receiver group, but it's got potential. I mean, I don't think Corey Davis is anywhere as bad as people made him out to be last year. Corey Davis was better than people made him out to be, but he's still a better receiver. I still think, acknowledging that it was a bit of a disappointing season from Corey Davis, especially after he suffered an injury that kind of cost him the second half of the year. Even acknowledging it was a disappointing season, I still think Corey Davis is a better receiver. Historically, if you look back to what he did with the Titans, he's a better receiver than how he looked last year. And 2 young guys with a lot of potential. Elijah Moore, who looked like he was on the verge of breaking out last year when he suffered a season-ending injury. And Garrett Wilson, who is a rookie, but a rookie who has skills, who seems like a plug-and-play type guy. And then the backfield, where you have Breece Hall and Michael Carter. And I never want to put too much on a rookie, but I think Breece Hall is going to be great. I've been going on and on about Breece Hall for the past month or so. And the Jets are going to be able to run the type of offense I think Mike LaFleur wants to run this year, because they upgraded the tight ends a bit. So I think it's going to be a run-first offense, and that's the type of thing that you've seen throughout the league. I mean, a great example of that would be, it's going back a bit. It's going back a decade, but Russell Wilson, when he came to Seattle, they had Marshawn Lynch, and Marshawn Lynch did a lot of the heavy lifting and made Russell Wilson's life a lot easier. Now, part of this was Russell Wilson was also great. Russell Wilson was handed a limited role, but he also performed the limited role better than anybody could have imagined. And I think that's what the Jets have put Zach Wilson into a decent spot where he's not going to have to carry the whole load. It's not going to be dropping him back 35 times a game and asking him to scan the entire field. It's not going to be a situation where he's going to have to carry the team on his back every single week, or it shouldn't be. And that's, unfortunately, the Jets have been in the habit of putting their young quarterbacks in a position where they've had to carry the team on their backs the entire season, pretty much every single game. Zach Wilson should not be in that spot this year. Now, they're going to need him to carry the team on his back occasionally, and he's going to have to make plays. Limiting what Zach Wilson needs to do does not mean Zach Wilson has to do nothing. He's got to show flashes. He's got to play consistently. He needs to continue not turning the ball over. He needs to continue protecting the football, but he's got to add playmaking ability to that, because we did not see a whole lot of playmaking ability last year from Zach Wilson. I don't need Zach Wilson to be an MVP this year, but I think Zach Wilson's got to be like a credible starting quarterback, a solid middle of the pack type quarterback. I think that would be a tremendous step forward for Zach Wilson. And the reason I think it's got to happen this year, and I think Zach Wilson's going to be here year 3 no matter what, but if you look through the recent history of NFL quarterbacks, if you don't show that you're a good quarterback the first 2 years, it usually does not happen. Occasionally it does. I mean, Eli Manning got off to a slow start. Drew Brees was a late bloomer, but those are the exceptions. The guys who are good usually show it by year 2. So if Zach Wilson doesn't show it this year, then we got a problem. But if Zach Wilson gets to the middle of the pack, if he plays credibly within the infrastructure the Jets are putting around him, you'll feel good about it. And by the way, the Jets are going to win games if Zach Wilson plays like a credible quarterback this year, because it's very difficult to overstate how much better a credible quarterback makes things. Jets have not had a credible quarterback play in quite a while. And if Zach Wilson gets to that point, Jets are going to improve more than you think. You know, you'll see all these preseason projections. Jets will win like 5 games or so. Zach Wilson makes a big step forward. They're going to win more than 5. They're going to make big steps. But Zach Wilson's not the only person in this franchise who needs to make big steps. Robert Saleh does also. And I'll talk about some of the steps Saleh needs to take. We just talked about Zach Wilson, who's obviously going to play a critical role for the Jets in 2022. But I also want to talk to you about Athletic Greens 1, which could play a critical role in helping your health. With 1 delicious scoop of AG1, you're absorbing 75 high-quality vitamins, minerals, whole food source superfoods, probiotics, and adaptogens to help start your day right. This special blend of ingredients supports your gut health, your nervous system, your immune system, your energy, recovery, focus, and aging. All the things. Tons of people take some multivitamin, and it's important to choose one with high-quality ingredients that your body will actually absorb. AG1 is a small micro-habit with big benefits. It's one thing you can do every single day to take care of yourself. And your subscription comes with a year's supply of vitamin D, which is so important to add in those winter months when we don't get as much sunlight. Right now, it's time to reclaim your health and arm your immune system with convenient daily nutrition. It's just 1 scoop in a cup of water every day. That's it. No need for a million different pills and supplements to look out for your health. And to make it easy, Athletic Greens is going to give you a free 1-year supply of immune-supporting vitamin D and 5 free travel packs with your first purchase. All you have to do is visit athleticgreens.com/NFL Network. Again, that is athleticgreens.com/NFL Network to take ownership over your health and pick up the ultimate daily nutritional insurance. Thank you for making Locked On Jets your first listen every day. This show is free and available on all platforms. Today we're talking about the key members of the Jets organization. We're talking quarterback, we're talking head coach, we're talking general manager. Now let's talk about the head coach, Robert Saleh, who's coming off a 4-13 first season. A season that I think in many ways was pretty disappointing. I think here's the thing with Saleh. I can't really tell you what he does well yet. Now, he inherited a tough spot. I mean, he was replacing Adam Gase. Well, replacing Adam Gase is actually a good spot because next to Gase, you're going to look great. But he inherited a team that was very much at the beginning stages of a rebuild. And we've seen this over and over in the NFL. There's some coaches who end up being really good who year 1 looked completely lost. In fact, Saleh was on one of those coaching staffs in San Francisco. That first year in 2017 under Kyle Shanahan, the Niners got off to a terrible start. And there were plenty of questions from the 49ers fan base about whether they had the right coaching staff in place. And then they traded for Jimmy Garoppolo, and with Garoppolo under center, they went on a big winning streak at the end of the season. But they looked lost at points. And I think, there were plenty of complaints about Saleh a year ago. I think some of them were fair. I think some of them were not fair. I mean, the coaching staff always gets blamed when the team loses. Now, I think it's fair to blame the coaching staff when you get crushed by the way they did in New England off the bye, because coming off the bye, you should never be beaten that badly. Even with, and I know Zach Wilson got hurt in that game, but they were on their way to being blown out, even with Zach Wilson. They just did not show up for that game. Saleh, of course, has a reputation for being a great players coach. I don't know what we saw last year. I think the book is open on Saleh. I'm not ready to declare Saleh as a bad coach. I'm not ready to declare him a failure. I'm just saying, we didn't really see a whole lot from him last year. The coaching staff he brought in, they went very young, very inexperienced. I think they're looking for energy. I think they're looking for youthful enthusiasm. We'll see how it works. I think, and more than anything, Saleh kind of has an incomplete grade for me right now because I don't know that he really had a fighting chance last year. And I feel like there was kind of like this philosophical thing within the organization that there were spots where they could have brought in the veteran stopgap player to kind of hold the fort, and they did not. They went very young. I think the philosophy was just they were going to go out there and make as many mistakes, let those young guys make mistakes, let them learn from their mistakes, and just live with the results, because they felt like the team probably wasn't going to have a winning season anyway. So why bring in a veteran and you win 5 instead of 4? I think that was the mindset. And there's plenty of criticism for Saleh over his defensive scheme, which I'm not sure is entirely fair. I mean, people talk about how simplistic it is. Well, again, you're going back, you're playing all these young guys out there. You can't really build in a ton of complexity when you have young guys who are still learning. And by the way, like, these young guys really did not show themselves able to execute some pretty simple concepts. So what do we need to see from Saleh this year? Well, I think there are a couple things. First of all, every coach looks better when the team wins. Every coach looks better when young players produce. But there are things that need to happen for the Jets. And I think Saleh and the coaching staff have done a better job communicating with Joe Douglas this past offseason than they did a year before. I look at on offense with Mike LaFleur, how frequently early in the season they were running 2 tight end sets when they did not look to address tight end in any meaningful way the previous offseason. That really did not make a whole lot of sense. It was one of those things where I was like, I did not understand the disconnect between LaFleur, between the way the Jets were playing and the way they approached the offseason, because they brought in Tyler Kroft, and then yet they're running this offense that has a ton of tight ends on it. It just it really did not make a whole lot of sense. But you want to see young players develop. I think that's the number one thing, because people talk about young players developing and winning games as though these are mutually exclusive propositions. They're really not. When young players develop, you win games. Always hear people say, "Well, I'd rather see I'd rather our young players develop and we win 2 games than our young players stink and we win 11." It doesn't make a lot of sense, because if your young players develop, you're not going to win 2. You're going to win games. If your young players stink, you're not going to win 11 games. So you want to see young talent develop, and there's always a question of how much of it is the coaching staff versus how much of it is just these players, and that's been the great question for the Jets the past decade plus is, are they bringing in the wrong players, or the coaching staff not doing a good job? Probably a little bit of both. Probably more that they're not bringing in the right players, but coaching staff can help put players in a position to succeed. So, that's number one. Number 2 is year 2 in the system. You'd like to see them go a little bit deeper. You'd like to see, and that can happen in a couple different ways. That can happen, it's not just always, getting more depth in the system is not necessarily all about calling more plays. Sometimes it's just about players understanding things. You can build more things into certain plays. If a team's running something that exploits a weakness in a certain defensive play call, you can build in an adjustment that maybe wasn't there a year ago because the player's more confident in the scheme. So you like to see a little bit of progression in that sense. You like to see the team more prepared in games where they should be prepared. I mean, that New England bye was clearly, that game off the bye in New England was clearly not very good. Overall, you just want to have a sense by this time next year what Saleh is good at. Because right now, I don't really know. I'm not saying, listen, I think Saleh's still got a chance to be really good. I mean, all the stuff he says makes a lot of sense when he talks about building the team. All the stuff he talks about theoretically, as far as the plan goes, makes a lot of sense. It's a question of whether he can implement the plan. So these are some things that I'm looking for from Robert Saleh. Now, Joe Douglas has pretty much done all of his work. So when we get to the 2022 season, it's really going to be a case of evaluating what Joe Douglas has done. I'll talk about what this season means for the Jets GM ahead as we close out this Friday episode of Locked On Jets. This is the Locked On Jets podcast. On this Friday, we are talking about the important people on the Jets team. We've talked about the quarterback, we've talked about the head coach, and now let's talk about the general manager, Joe Douglas. And the thing with Joe Douglas is the work for Zach Wilson lies ahead. The work for Robert Saleh lies ahead. The work for Joe Douglas is largely done. He can make a few moves. Maybe he can bring in a guy who's a camp cut somewhere. Maybe there's a trade to be worked out. But Joe Douglas has set the roster. So there's not a lot he can do right now. But this season will tell us a lot about Joe Douglas. Again, I don't think he's going to be on the hot seat. But I think depending on what happens here, he could enter 2023 on the hot seat, or he could enter 2023 with a contract extension. He's going to be judged on the players he's brought in. Joe Douglas inherited a very difficult job when he was hired back in 2019. And I've defended him not so much from the standpoint that I thought he was a slam dunk to be a great GM. I defended him from the standpoint that it was such a big job that it was going to take time to clean everything up. And we finally reached a point where this is really Joe Douglas's team. And I think that point was really kind of last year, but we were still in a stage where the Jets were very young. They still had not brought in a ton of veterans yet. Now you've got 3 Joe Douglas draft classes on this team. His first draft class is entering year 3. His second draft class is entering year 2. He's got a third draft class with 4 top 36 picks. He's brought in a lot. He's done a lot in free agency. I mean, pretty much almost everybody on this team. There are a few exceptions like Quinnen Williams, but almost everybody on this team has either been brought in by Joe Douglas or re-signed by Joe Douglas. So this is very much his team now. And even 3 years in, I'm not expecting a Super Bowl team, but there have to be clear, tangible signs of progress. And 2021 draft class is a big year for them because that 2020 draft class is not looking very good right now. And I think at this point, the 2020 draft class, the best you can hope for is maybe there are a couple decent players out of there. We're not going to look back on that as a wildly successful class. 2021, entering year 2, big expectations, not just on Zach Wilson, but on Elijah Vera-Tucker, on Elijah Moore, Michael Carter II. What can he provide out of the slot? If the Jets are going to move forward, they're going to need these picks to hit. And we also need to look at Joe Douglas's, the guys he's brought in. The Jets were very aggressive in free agency this year. Joe Douglas has been bad in free agency to this point. I mean, I don't think there's any other way to put it. His first 2 free agencies have not really worked out. The exceptions would be George Fant and Connor McGovern. But outside of that, there aren't many successful signings Joe Douglas has made in his two-year tenure. And that's fine. But now we're to the point where we got to start hitting on some of these guys. And the team needs to show tangible progress. And we need to have a feel that Joe Douglas really has righted the ship, that the Jets are a team clearly moving in the right direction. And if not, then we're going to have some tough discussions at the end of the year. At the very least, I think Joe Douglas begins 2023 with some degree of heat on his seat. Talking about the hot seat. I don't know if he's necessarily going to be entering 2023 with his job on the line, but it'll be a situation where the pressure will continue to increase. Anyway, that's all for our show today. Thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. This has been the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day is our motto. If you enjoy the show, subscribe to it where podcasts are found. And please leave the show a 5-star review if you're listening on a podcast source, and a thumbs up if you're watching on YouTube. Hope you have a great weekend. Again, this will be our final episode daily until training camp, but I will see you next time. There will be for our next episode of Locked On Jets.